This is Blackstone Joe, and you're listening to Slick Talk.
If I say I'm an oil man, you will agree.
There's the stink of oil about him.
All right, welcome into episode 93. Again, I am your host, Blackstone Joe. Listeners who are new that may be joining us, I am a senior analyst with Blackstone, as well as host of this podcast where we tell you all about oil and all the things that analyzing used oil can tell you. Today I have Justin Kilmer on the show with me. Justin is a name that you might recognize if you've been reading any articles lately regarding a 2003 Honda Accord that's racked up over 1 million miles. That's right, over 1 million on a V6 motor. I crossed paths with Justin because not only has his name been in the news recently, but he's also a customer of ours. We've seen a couple of samples from this very same Honda that we're going to be talking about, and it was over the course of a workday where actually the co-producer of this show passed along a sample from this Honda in particular. And when you see a gasoline engine with over 1 million miles, well, the first thing you want to do is make sure that you don't need a new pair of glasses, that there's been no typos on the slip, that you have your ducks in a row before going right into the results, because frankly, the results themselves were also very impressive in the second and latest sample that we got from this engine. And after I was able to reach out to Justin, he was kind enough to schedule a time to sit down and talk with me about his car, his maintenance over the years, use the engine has seen, and his road to 1 million plus. I think a lot of you might be interested enough already, so I'm going to cut to the chase. This is me and Justin hanging out. We now welcome on very special guest to this episode of Slick Talk, Justin Kilmer. Justin, thank you so much for joining me.
Hey, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
So Justin, aka TX Accord on YouTube and Instagram. I came across your file when one of my coworkers, actually co-producer of this show, he sent a sample my way and he said, whoa, there is an Accord with over 1 million miles on it. And so I immediately had to look at the sample. He named it the absolute legend, and that's certainly deserving. Where does your journey with this '03 Accord start?
So actually from the very beginning, my wife actually bought this car brand new in 2003 from Pensacola Honda back when we were dating. And she drove it as her family car for years, and then I took it over, and then I've put a whole bunch of miles on it since then. But
So
yeah, we've had the entire time brand new off the lot.
is that normal for you to want to buy a new car and see it through to the end? I mean, what's your typical ownership track record go as far as vehicles?
Oh, when I was younger, I used to trade cars like crazy. Like every few months, I'd end up with a new car, or not new, but new to me car. I've never had a car this long. I've never had a car with nearly this many miles or anything either. I think this is the first car I've ever taken over 200,000.
So what made it so special? Was it, how well it did on gas, the Honda reputation? I mean, they have great reputations around here with what we do in oil analysis, but was there something on your end where over the course of owning it those first few years, you thought, we're really going to stick it out with this one and just see what it can do?
Well, the special thing about this car, to us at least, my wife and me, we both are manual transmission fans, and it's a 6-speed. This was the first year that Honda put in the 6-speed with the V6 in 2003. And so she bought it specifically for that reason, and just kept on going. And we really like the car. It is good on gas. All power options, leather interior, and everything. So it kind of had everything that we were looking for, and just kept driving it.
Well, that brings me to another topic. The video you took, which people can check out on your YouTube channel. I don't know if it's on your Instagram as well, but when you're crossing that 1 million mile mark, I was watching that video earlier today, and the coolest part about it for me was hearing that transmission shifting in the background, because it brought up so much nostalgia for me, because I learned how to drive on a manual. So I love the experience of that.
Right.
They're so hard to find now. So the manual was definitely a big part in you hanging on to it for all these years.
For sure. currently in our garage, 3-car garage, all three garage stalls are filled with Accords that are manual transmissions, or they have manual transmissions.
Love it. So
So yeah.
when it comes to oil analysis in particular, one thing I was curious, you're a flight simulator instructor. Uh, was oil analysis ever talked about in your line of work?
Um, yeah, I mean, I guess like when there's engine problems and things like that, yeah, we may not, as pilots, we may not get the download of the details of everything specifically, like not definitely not like you send, just be like a kind of generalized statement, hey, we found this is the reason for the problem, and we're going to fix it type thing. But yeah, I mean, heard about that before, definitely through aviation as well.
And as far as yourself jumping into the experience, how did you get introduced to Blackstone Laboratories or, the industry in general?
Okay. So I've got a friend, Tim, who I met online. I've since hung out with in person a couple times. Real good friend. We chat all the time, and he'd been using your services for quite a while. And at one point he just said, "Hey, you should send off a sample, especially with all the miles the engine had on it." And so he's like, "Yeah, you just go to the website, request a kit, they'll mail it to you." And he said, "You just take the sample and send it back to him." Said, you give me your credit card information. They'll send you a little personalized report. So I did that. My first report here from y'all came from April 23rd of 2021. Car had almost 800,000 miles on it. So that's how I got turned on to it. And, it's really neat, all the stuff that you analyze. And then I think part of the coolest part of it is the comment section where, it's actually got personalized comments. It's not just, hey, we tested it and it had X amount of whatever in the oil. So I like the personalized part of it as well.
Yeah, definitely. That's what appeals to me about writing the comments as well, is the fact that we're free to connect and sort of,
Mm-hmm.
insert any sort of personal, take we might have. And if I had seen that first sample from your Honda, I mean, right away I'd be jumping to make sure we had our details correct, because 790,000, is impressive enough. And I want to talk about that first sample a little bit because we saw a couple of high levels back then, but obviously
Mm-hmm.
went way further and didn't have to do any major engine work that I know of. Specifically, we saw a lot of copper and lead. And I was wondering, back then you had mentioned using, I believe, Marvel Mystery Oil around that time, or was there any other additive in the maintenance history around that point in time?
So, yeah, specifically around that point in time, I had started adding a little bit of Marvel Mystery Oil to the oil shortly before or before the oil change. Say a few hundred miles before I'd change it, I'd let some of that run through and keep that in there for a little bit. And then I had used some engine restore. Now, of course, the more miles the car had on it, started using some oil. I remember back in the day, I could actually change the oil and run probably about 4,000 miles or so before I had to add a drop of oil to it. And then, as time went on and miles went on, then it started working its ways down to 3,000, 2,000, so on and so forth. So as I noticed I was, going through more oil between changes, I had started adding every once in a while the restore, the engine restore. So that's where y'all said that those levels came from, was from the engine restore, the
Yeah,
heavy metal levels in there.
yeah, it makes perfect sense because I remember looking at the slip on that first sample, seeing the MMO and thinking, well, harmless, doesn't really leave any elements behind. I was like, but
Mhm.
restore though, because the reason that jumped out to us, copper and lead, they were at similar levels, and the additive uses a heavy dose of each of those elements. So the fact they were similar, but also the fact that every other metal looked good, and there was enough of each of those metals where, unless you were noticing like low oil pressure, some sort of a knock, it just didn't make sense for all of that to actually be from the bearing. So it's good to know a harmless source of each of those elements,
Mm-hmm.
because clearly you're able to go a lot longer. So I want to talk next about the gap between these samples because it's a lot of mileage. Was there anything maintenance wise between the 790,000? I know it's a big stretch, and the million, where you really had to invest some time or labor into keeping that Honda on the road?
Well, with the J series engine specifically, they require timing belt change approximately every 105,000 miles, and I've stuck to that. So in between those samples, it would have had a couple where actually I changed the timing belt if I recall correctly, around 850,000. And then the engine kind of got sick a little bit, we'll say, at just over 900,000, about 920,000. Ended up, I still haven't pulled the engine apart yet. It either dropped a valve or sucked a valve seat out. But anyhow, number one cylinder went away. It just went to zero compression. So that's been my big thing with the original engine. So didn't do any maintenance as far as opening it up necessarily. It's just the timing belts, or the one timing belt replacement between the two of those.
So you're able to keep it rolling even with the one cylinder being gone. It still ran well enough, or what exactly was the difference in operation on your end?
Yeah, so it's pretty surprising. So it was right around 920,000 miles. I was out driving one night and car made a shudder and started flashing the engine light at me. So I pulled over. I actually had my scanner in the car with me, so I scanned it, multiple misfires and everything like that. So I've got a shop that I use locally for certain things, and so I sent it to the shop and I told them what happened, and they tested it and they did a leak down test and said, yeah, number one cylinder's got zero compression, it's dead. And so, my mechanic's recommendation, he said, with the high miles on the engine, he's like, if you try to, do a valve job or put new heads on there, he said, if you restore the compression, he's like, it may blow the rings out. So he said, you're currently using about a quarter every 1,000 miles. He said, if you blow the rings out, it'll be like a quarter every 100 miles. And at that level, I was so close to getting to 1,000,000. And Honda had never had a V6 hit 1,000,000. And so I was really, really wanting to make it. So he said, well, it'll run for a good little while if you leave it alone. He said, your gas mileage will suffer, your power will suffer, but he said it'll run. So I trusted him and just kept running it. So after I went to the 5 cylinders, I went from about 28 miles a gallon on the highway down to about 20. So it really hurt my gas mileage a lot. Of course, power was way down, really, really slow, especially in the South Texas heat and everything. But the thing is, it still ran. And so it was good enough to get me around. I made a couple halfway across the country trips with it. Wasn't scared to drive it, even off 5 cylinders, oddly enough. And then we finally just pulled the engine about, 3 or 4 weeks ago. We pulled it out. It's got 1,015,708 miles on it.
Wow. It shocks me just to look at the numbers here. And I mean,
yeah,
in this, especially because we fast forward to this latest sample, and I was showing this to my boss, the president of Blackstone, and before we got on the call, I was just showing the results to him and saying, hey, check this out. I'm going to talk to this guy. And he looks at that second set of wear levels and he goes, well, it's a Honda,
Yep.
He just wasn't surprised. So,
yeah.
With this amount of mileage on the engine, I see that in about 3,000 miles, you burned a little over a quart. Was that pretty consistent as far as your rate of oil consumption, or was that something that cropped up, maybe recently after the issues with the number one cylinder? Or just tell me a little bit about oil consumption and what you came to expect during your later stages of ownership.
Okay. So yeah, I think I said earlier that as the engine got more miles on it, started, of course, using some more oil between changes. And so whereas I used to be able to go the 4,000 miles or so before adding oil, then it worked its way down, and it got all the way down to about 1,000 miles for every quart. I noticed when I would change the oil, I could maybe get 12 to 1,500 miles before I'd have to add oil. And then usually after that first time I added it, it was about every 1,000 miles or so. So, I mean, we're talking, and I mean, obviously I try to keep up with the maintenance and care of it and stuff. Otherwise it never gets to this level. But we're talking basically every fill up, I was, popping the hood, checking the oil, trying to make sure, because sometimes I drive 300-400 miles and it'd go from the high level on the dipstick down to the low level, and I'd have to add about a half quart there. So I was really trying to keep up with that. But yeah, the problem with number one cylinder didn't seem to really weigh one way or the other on the oil consumption. It seemed to be consistent through that. It just was the lack of power and the fuel economy. But yeah, over time it had just worked its way down. But the thing I found funny was I worked it down to where it was 1,000 miles for every quart of oil. And that's what a lot of manufacturers are saying for new cars is considered to be normal, which to me just sounds crazy. I know all the oil I've put in this thing lately, and I wouldn't want to do that to a new car.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's one engine model in particular I'm thinking of off the top of my head where it's advertised by the manufacturer that it can burn up to a quart every 500, and that's right out of the gate. So you're doing a long way better than that.
Yeah.
As far as the oil and the filter, I'm curious, did you have a dedicated maintenance plan with regards to I'm going to use this oil, this filter, no matter what, every fill, or did that sometimes change for you?
So yeah, very good question. Of course, when people hear about the car, that's one of the first things they ask is actually like, what kind of oil do you use? Like almost bar none, that's the question I get most often is, what do you use for oil? That everyone wants to know that. So right out of the gate, when my wife bought the car, I looked in the owner's manual. I believe, thinking back all these years ago, I believe it's 3,750 miles is what they recommend for oil change interval. And back then, we were just running regular, conventional oil. I was running a Castrol GTX. I had used Castrol pretty much my whole life as a kid, growing up, and liked it a bunch. So Castrol GTX was the way we went. And I used that all the way up to approximately 140,000 miles. And I was changing it pretty much per the manufacturer's recommendation about every 3,750 or so, give or take a few miles, obviously. And at 140, I guess for no particular reason, I decided to give Mobile One a try. And so I decided I was just going to give it a shot. I'd heard all these years about synthetic, about how much better it was and stuff. And so I thought, well, let me just give it a shot. It's supposed to be able to last longer between changes and stuff. So I went to the store, got some Mobile One 5W20, the extended performance, and right there on the jug it says, superior protection, like up to 15,000 miles. And I thought, well, let's see. So literally, and this is what usually blows people's mind, literally around 140,000 when I switched over to Mobile One. From then on until just recently, just the past, like, say 80 or 100,000 miles, I was running basically 15,000 mile oil change intervals.
Mm-hmm.
And so I thought, well, they advertise it, and so I'll just see. And I mean, yeah, I would have to add oil between, changes and stuff, but wasn't bad in the beginning. And then of course progressively got worse as, the miles piled on the engine and stuff. But yeah, that's when we switched over. And as far as oil filters, I used Fram a long time ago. I know I've since heard, some differing opinions on Fram and things, but pretty much anymore, it's been Purelator. I run that a lot, and then Mobile One filters. But I'm running, if I'm keeping the oil in there that long, I'm putting the better filters on, the ones that are advertised for those extended oil change intervals. So I'm buying like the higher level filters. I've used K&N as well, but it's pretty much been Purelator, like Purelator One, Purelator Boss, or the Mobile One, or the K&N filters that I've been using for the past several years.
During those 15,000 mile runs, I mean, are we talking mainly highway miles?
Yes, for sure.
Because
Um,
that's one thing I was curious about, because not only is it a Honda, which they don't tend to make a lot of metal, we see that
mhm.
all the time, but also they're well suited to these longer oil runs, and that's often playing a role in how little metal they make and how good they look, because all that highway mileage is so much easier on a motor
Mhm.
than constant, stop and go. So it doesn't surprise me you're able to get those 15,000 mile runs with, ease on the engine, not just because of whatever oil you're using, but the use being so perfect. When you were getting into these 15,000 mile intervals, did anyone think that's crazy because of what use the car is seeing? Like, did you get any pushback from people you knew or anyone who worked on cars, anything like that?
Well, I got a good friend who's helping me put the new engine in the car now, and he's helped me with both clutches that I've replaced and things like that. And so years ago, when the car had a few 100,000 miles on it, I told him that I'd been running Mobile One 15,000 mile intervals. He thought it was crazy. He's like, I've never seen people do more than about 6,000 miles. He's like, I'd never do that. But he said, obviously it's working. At 300 plus thousand, he looked inside the oil cap there, and he's like, yeah, it looks pretty clean. He's like, can't fault you for what you're doing because it's obviously working.
Mm-hmm. And with this new motor, I mean, what are you looking at as far as the engine type? Are you going with another V6 of the same make model? Like, what went into your choice of the replacement motor?
It's the exact same. I know a lot of people try to modify and do different things, but with this being my daily driver, and I'm still planning on keeping it as a daily driver for foreseeable future, I didn't want to put anything in that was not going to be reliable. So ended up going back with the same Honda J30A4. It's the 3 liter V6. It's the exact engine that came in it, in 2003. So it's just an identical engine. There's company that had bought some stock of engines from Honda and was reselling them, and so I got it from them. And yeah, it's a brand new 0 mile Honda engine. pretty and shiny.
Yeah. So you're getting ready to install, or is it where are you at as far as the process of getting the Honda back on the road?
So it's taken a lot longer than I'd hoped. But last night he came over and we actually got the engine dropped back in the car. So now it's just a matter of getting everything bolted up and wiring and put the intake on, things like that. So we're hoping by next week we're back on the road. But it's been down for a little over a month, just work schedules and different things like that. My friend was sick for a couple of weeks and stuff. So taking a lot longer I'd hoped for. But yeah, I'm hoping next week's finally the week I'm back on the
Yep.
road with it.
What's your break-in procedure going to be as far as the first couple of oil changes, filter type, oil type, so on?
So that's what I was looking at online, trying to figure out like what the recommendations were. And really, it seems like just like with the type of oil people use, it's a lot of opinions and, oh, I know someone that did this and that. And so I've read about the hard break-in procedures and easy break-in procedures. My friend said, well, he's like, do you think that, Honda spends, all this time to specifically run a certain procedure on every new car? He's like, no, he's like, just start it up. We'll let it run, make sure it's full of coolant through a couple cycles of the fan. And we'll go out and drive it. Don't be too rough with it for the first, little bit. One thing I did see, it seems that people recommend with a brand new engine to not use synthetic right off the bat. So I went and got conventional oil, which oddly enough is getting hard to find. I went to Walmart and in 5W20, the only thing I could find that was conventional was Quaker State.
Hmm.
So I got a couple jugs of that. And I figure I'll probably run the first little bit for maybe 500 miles, change it out, new oil, new filter, and then maybe do another 500-mile interval. And then after that, probably just switch back to Mobile One and just let it go.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, after a couple of oil changes, when the break-in and the sealer are gone, and then
Mhm.
getting back to a more standard oil change interval would definitely be what we're typically accustomed to seeing, what we fully expect to see good results, out of that replacement motor as well. So yeah, we hope to see how that new motor does for you and how it performs. As far as the medical courier work, is that going to continue? Or are you going to be planning on sticking to a lot of driving, a lot of highway miles with the new engine in place?
So, I mean, it's not like as a young kid I said one of these days I'm going to have a car with 1 million miles and it's going to be popular. No, I had no plans or idea that this would ever happen. But as the car got closer and closer to 1 million, I decided to just let it go and see what I could get out of it. But now that I've hit it, I keep joking with people. No one cares about a car with 1,050,000 miles. So unless I was going to run it up a whole lot longer, I don't think that I mean, I've got a pretty decent following online now, people that think it's a cool story, but I don't have any plans specifically for miles for, what I'm trying to hit from here on out. I do somewhat enjoy the medical courier job. It takes up a lot of time and everything, and I do have another full-time job, the flight simulator instructor. So that job as well. So I don't want to, work my life away and never have any time to, spend with family and friends and stuff like that. So I'm definitely backing off a lot from where I was before with the courier thing. But I'll still drive, see what I get. But I'm not worried about when I'm going to hit a certain milestone anymore, like I was before the million.
Yeah, I totally understand. You've definitely put the time in. I'm
Yeah.
curious about the social media profiles that have been building, as awareness of this car has grown. What's it been like with Instagram and YouTube, the interaction with the online Honda community or just, car guys at large? What's it been like as you have shown this Honda off and more people have found out about it?
So it was kind of a slow build as far as that goes. And I mean, my YouTube channel is still very, very small. I've got like a little over 700 subscribers. Instagram is a little bit better. I've got well over 3,000 on there. Um, for the last 3.5 years or so, I've been blogging about it on driveaccord.net, Accord owner website. So I've been, posting things on there, and it's by far the highest mileage car on that site and everything. So I'm well known on that site and everything. But I kind of feel like I was trying to jump up and down on my little corner of the internet, trying to get notoriety for it, and wasn't able to really do it. I guess I just suck at social media, but um,
The
it's,
algorithms are
it's
tricky.
they are. Um, it's been really neat. I've met people through that website. Like I told you, my friend Tim that turned me on to Blackstone, met him through driveaccord.net. Got a couple other good friends on there that we've met in person, hung out for a couple weekends and everything. We chat all the time and stuff. one of the neat things is once the Million Mile article hit, of course, things blew up. Like my social media was really busy for a couple weeks after that hit, which was really neat. Got a bunch more subscribers and followers and things. But uh, my name, Justin Kilmer. So one of my favorite shows is NCIS, and
Uh-huh.
there's a Justin Kilmer on that show that is part of the production, and with that being my favorite show, of course I'd seen that name on there before. Well, turns out he had, at some point, everyone Googles their own name once in a while just to see what's out there, right? He had Googled his name at some point and found out about me. He had seen a picture of me next to the Navy jet I was flying like a few years ago. He didn't know how to reach out to me. And so once the Million Mile thing hit and he saw that, he made a comment on something with Instagram or maybe the YouTube video, but said, "Hey, I was surprised to see my name in this in this article or whatever." And I knew about him, and so I wrote back. I was like, "Is this the NCIS producer?" And I didn't get any comment back, but he DM'd me later, and we've actually been chatting like the last few months, like pretty much every week, a couple times a week and stuff. And we're planning on meeting here next month. So to me, that's one of the coolest things is I've made friends with this car that I never would have made before, and then potentially met someone, or going to meet someone with the same last name, and we're exploring. There may even be some sort of family relation there down the line.
Wow.
Yeah,
That's
I
awesome.
would never guess anything like that off of driving a car to a certain milestone.
I'm wondering too on the online side, it's bound to be the case where you have a car that's getting attention. Did anyone suggest any maintenance to you and over the course of your posts where they thought this guy might need my help, my tips, my tricks to take care of the car? Has anyone sort of tried to be an armchair mechanic for you as you've gained awareness?
Um, I I guess the thing that would come to mind is just the people that just think that I'm nutty for going 15,000 miles between oil changes. And since I mentioned that, I'll just say that the new engine, my plan is to probably do about 7 to 7,500 mile intervals. I think that's probably a little bit more in line with being normal. But I was telling people when I was driving all the time, I was putting on so many miles that even with 15,000 mile change intervals, I was changing the oil every 5 weeks. So to me, I didn't want to be out in the garage like once every 2 weeks or something, doing the oil and stuff. So I just let it run with all the highway miles. But yeah, that's probably the biggest thing is just, every once in a while people mention about the, oil change intervals and couldn't believe it and stuff. But I get a lot of, hey, I've got, a Accord or a Civic that's got, 335,000 miles and I've had it for all these years. So I get a lot of those, owner stories as well, which is cool to see.
Yeah, and switching gears too from the Honda because I want to make sure we get into this a little bit as well.
Mm-hmm.
When you're out flying, what are you typically flying, and how do you get into the aviation side?
Okay, so became a pilot through the Navy and ended up flying, all the flight school aircraft, T-34, T-44, the P-3. I flew P-3 in the fleet for a few years, and then started flying their trainer jet called the T-45. And so I ended up flying T-45 for almost 9 years, and I retired from the Navy, so I'm not flying for them anymore. But I'm teaching the simulators on the ground. Other than that, I haven't done a whole lot of civilian time. I've rented a couple Cessnas here and there over the years, but haven't really flown much civilian time. But definitely military, mostly military time.
Yeah, we see a ton of aircraft samples, as you might imagine, especially
Mm-hmm.
Cessnas, really anything, because oil analysis is just as important, if not more so, for a lot of pilots, obviously, and owners as it
Mm-hmm.
is anyone driving anything over the road. So, do you ever make it out to Oshkosh by chance?
No, I've seen pictures and stuff and heard about it. I've never made it up there. But I know they have the huge air show and everything. That'd be really cool to see sometime.
Air show's a blast. We have a booth there once every 2 years. I believe we're going back this summer as well. Great time out there. So, yeah, well, this has been a really cool experience for me, just learning more about your Honda, your maintenance plan, how you've been able to keep this car on the road. I want to make sure everyone listening remembers to check out your YouTube, your Instagram page. That's TX Accord. Follow along with Justin, his vehicle ownership. Maybe learn something along the way. Who knows? You might have a car that you're able to get a million plus on Perhaps. No, Justin, we hope to stay in touch, hope to see more samples from you, and
For sure.
play any part that we can in your maintenance journey.
Cool. All right. Thanks so much for having me.
All right. That was Justin Kilmer and I discussing his Honda V6 and the $1 million+ on that motor. Thanks again to Justin for joining me for the show. If you have a story anywhere in the ballpark of this Honda, and heck, it doesn't even have to be that impressive mileage-wise. If you have a vehicle, a boat, an aircraft, anything you've been taking care of that needs oil to do its job, and you have a story that you want to tell, anything related to the maintenance, especially on the oil side, if you've been using our services to keep track of the health, or you've hunted down a problem, you've been able to use oil analysis to your advantage to find out what's been going on, we'd love to hear about it. So don't hesitate to reach out. Easy ways to find us are Instagram, Facebook. You can also send us an email, bstone@blackstone-labs.com. And if you haven't been following us already, make sure you go to Instagram or Facebook. Our Instagram handle is Blackstone Laboratories. That brings today's show to a close. This is Blackstone Joe signing off.